I just kind of noticed in the Bible there are a lot of characters in the Bible, and I'm going to start with. I think that's the one I'm going to start with. Yeah, I'm going to start with my favorite character in the Bible, David, right? And the reason he's my favorite is because he was like this fearsome warrior, but then he also like wrote these love letters to God, like in Psalms, and it's like such a wonderful like contrast and a dynamic that
Mm,
he has. So I think David's just awesome that way. But yeah, the story of David, and there's so many other stories we're going to go through, but David was like a man of faith, right? Like he was so faithful. Like a lot of these Bible characters are very, very faithful. And they're more faithful than the average person, of course, right? Like they've showed
mm,
tremendous faith, but they still struggle, right? Peter is another one, and I just love to get into as well. He's faithful. Like he's a man who was like, I'm gonna fight for God. Like, Jesus came to him and he's like, follow me. And Peter was like, okay. And he is so faithful. And you get to the point where Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," to Peter. And it's like moments. Like I remember I was reading Matthew. It's literally moments after Jesus had asked Peter, you know, what do you people believe I am, right? And they were kind of just like, oh, people say you are the prophet Elijah, like reincarnated. People say you're like John the Baptist reincarnated or whatever. And then Jesus asks, is like, who do you say I am? And then Peter was like, I believe you are the Christ, right? And the Christ means the Messiah. Correct me if I'm wrong, Darian. I think that's what it means, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And Peter had a moment, like he just showed it like a moment of faith. And literally moments later, Jesus is like, oh, I'm gonna die. And then Peter's like, no. He like literally reprimanded Jesus. He's like, no, you will not die. Because of how much he loves Jesus, how much faith he had in him. But then it's also
Mm,
just duality of like you can have all that like love and passion for Jesus and still have Jesus say to you, get behind me, Satan, because who are you to tell Jesus like you're
yeah.
not gonna die, right? Like because they in that moment, Peter's like, no, you can't die. I don't want you to die. You're the Messiah. It's not right for the Messiah to die. All right. And Jesus is
Yeah.
reprimanding him. He's like, no, get back in place. Like, get behind me, Satan. This is the will of God, and it's above your understanding, and you must be like that's something you must understand. But moments before, Peter was so faithful. And I just love, like, you see that over and over again. And I think it's just important for us to realize that, yeah, we do all fall short. And like we all know the story of Peter, like of Jesus telling Peter, "You're going to deny me 3 times," and Peter's like, "Absolutely not, I'll never do that." And then he denies Jesus 3 times, and then he's crying, and I'm like, I can relate so hard with that because it's like we all have like this passion for Jesus. It's like I would never deny Jesus 3 times, But then Peter finds himself in a situation where it's happening, and you can just imagine how much his heart will sink and how much he was crying like that when that happened. And I think
Mm.
those kind of stories are just I find them so important for us to see. But before I do get to the story of David, I kind of started just rambling on Peter. I have anything to add to that, Darren?
No, exactly, bro. I agree with everything, and yeah, it's crazy. Like that always used to get me, and I always used to be so judgmental towards Peter when I watched. I think I watched The Passion of the Christ. That was the first time I saw it. I never read about it. I saw it in there, um,
Mhm.
where Peter literally just denied, like, no, I don't know who he is. Like, he's not the Messiah. Like, he did it 3 times, and I always thought from that point on. I was very young. I was a small child, and I used to say, "How can you do that?" And I remember I used to cry because I was like, "How can you say that?" And I was crying because I was a child, and I used to get like so angry, and I used to get so irritated. But at the same time, like we Peter, okay, like at one stage
Literally.
we were Peter, we were Judas at one stage,
Yeah.
and all stages in our lives, and like it just made me think about it in such a different light when you realize like what grace is and the amount of love God had and Jesus had for his disciples and for everyone, which is so true. And what you said about like how people in the Bible are way more faithful than the people are now. And I agree with that completely because I feel like now, I mean, you're getting so many distractions and technology and all these things are just like advancing what, wasn't what people didn't have back then. And I think that's just created more of an opportunity to sin and more of an opportunity to drift away from God and all these things. So yeah, bro, it's brilliant points you made there. But I'll let you continue with David.
Yeah, so I think I'll just get into my favorite character, David. Like we all know about like the story of David and Goliath. Like again, I don't need to go too deep into that story. David showed a lot of faith. He's like a little kid and he's coming up against this
Mm,
9 foot, however tall he was, Goliath. Who's defeated everyone and no one has beaten him, and all he has is a little slingshot and a stone and his faith in God, right? But again, it was his faith in God that got him to kill Goliath. But it's so interesting. I'm going
Mm.
to get to the David and Bathsheba story. I think that's the famous one where he kind of had a fall. Um, Before that, I was kind of watching. So like almost 2 weeks ago, I've been watching these like animated Bible stories. I find them so interesting online. Um, I was watching the story of like David, right? So obviously, they came and they picked him. Is he the one who, we spoke about like in Samuel where it says, um, do not overlook him, like I've rejected him. Do not look at him based on his appearance. I've rejected him. God looks at the heart. He was talking about David, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the prophet Samuel was sent to go get a warrior from the tribe of Jesse, and he gets David's like he's the little shepherd boy. Like when they're like, no, do you have one more son? And then you're like, yeah, we have David, but I don't know why you'd want him. And, the Lord's telling
Mm.
Samuel is like, do not judge him based on his appearance. Like he said, yeah, I forgot the exact wording, but you know what I mean. God does not look at the appearance, looks at the heart. And David, he goes there and he defeats Goliath while he's still like very young and everything. Funnily enough, I don't know how it ended up this way, but it was when Saul wanted to kill him, right? And David was running away from Saul.
Mm.
And again, I don't know. Again, I don't know too much about exactly what the Bible says about this. I haven't read like the story itself. I've just watched videos based on it, so I want to be careful, like kind of saying something. So this is based on what I've seen on a biblical story that has been made on YouTube. So I don't know exactly if the Bible says that David running away from Saul was wrong, because it is still, again, it's another like
Yeah.
issue we deal with as Christians, where it's like, should David be running away and using his common sense to stay alive, or should he stay there and trust in God, right? But where this person was leaning towards, the person that made the video was saying that like David was running, like when he was running away from Saul, he kind of forgot, he kind of forgot about God, like about his faith in God. And there's a part where he goes to one of these villages or one of these kingdoms, right? And he gets given like the sword of Goliath, and because Goliath, he had died and everything, he was given the sword of Goliath to defend himself, right? And what the author was saying, again, I don't know if David was wrong for running away or if it was right, like using his common sense. But what the author was saying was that it was a show of like that should have been a moment to tell David that like you've kind of forgotten, where your faith and your strength comes from. Like you're relying on your own strength now.
Mm.
Saul's trying to kill you, and you're busy running away from place to place. You're not getting like you can't sleep properly because you're just so anxious. And you got into a place where you're being given the sword of Goliath, and you should see that like you killed Goliath because of the strength, because of the not the strength, because of the faith you had in God. And now you're kind of lacking faith in God now, and like you're needing like Goliath's sword to like try and defend yourself. But yeah, that wasn't
Mm.
an era of David's life where he was just running away and everything. It was a dark period in his life. I think I don't know which Psalms they are, because there's like 151 Psalms, but I'm never gonna remember which Psalms it was that he wrote where
Too
he was
many.
like I think it's one of the Psalms is one of those verses where he was like, Lord, do not turn your face away from me, or whatever it was. But it was that period where he was running away from Saul, and it was like again, that was kind of a lack of David's faith. It was a show that like he's just come from killing, he's killed Goliath. Like you killed Goliath like because of your
Mm.
faith in God, and now you're running away and stuff. But as I said, I don't know what the Bible says about um whether this was right or wrong that David was running away. But I do want to get to the crux of it, the Bathsheba incident or issue. David, like again, we've outlined David was a man of faith. Like he was a man of faith, a man after God's own heart. Like Solomon, who's someone we're going to get into later, right? Solomon stuffed it up, like royally stuffed it up. Like God was so pleased with Solomon again because he was faithful, and he asked for wisdom and everything, and he blessed him so much. But then Solomon stopped listening to God, and he started taking on foreign women who turned his hearts to the pagan gods. And God was gone. He was gonna like take away all of like Solomon's riches and future generations. Like I remember reading it, I was like, damn, that's wild. Because God was
Mm.
he was gonna take away everything. But he said the only reason your sons and your grandchildren, whatever, the only reason I'll allow your bloodline to carry on being prosperous is because of what your father David like did, because of who he was, because of the promise he
Mm.
made to David. And that's a show of just how faithful David was. Like David was a man described as a man after God's own heart, right? Like like it was incredible the amount of faith David had, and still
Yeah.
he fell. Right, still he fell when the Bathsheba moment happened. And this again, it's also interesting
Yeah.
just to note, when David like saw Bathsheba on the rooftop, and all of that stuff happened. All the other kings were out at war, and David, for whatever reason, decided to stay at home. Again, the Bible doesn't say anything about this, whether it was wrong or right for David to stay at home. It doesn't say why David decided to stay at home, but it was just important to note all the other kings were out fighting in battle, and David just decided to stay at home. And then that kind of thing happened. But yeah, so we all know what happened with Bathsheba. David saw Bathsheba, and he was like, "Bring her to me." And then I'm committed adultery, because Bathsheba was also um, a married woman, right? And then after she got
Yeah.
pregnant, he tried to get Uriah, who was Bathsheba's husband, who was also David's best friend, um, to lay with her, right? She tried to get him to lay with her, so that they can cover up the pregnancy, basically, and like raise the kid as his own. But Uriah, again, he was being faithful. Like, he was like, no, I'm in a time of war. Like, I'm not going to do that, right? Which I think also points to the fact that he definitely shouldn't have done what he did, but certainly it was a time of war. He should not have been thinking about that at all. But Uriah said no, and then David's next plan was to get Uriah killed and put him in like the front line, and then Uriah would die, and then I think that's exactly what happened. Um, and you see, like, David is just digging himself into a hole here, like just trying to like cover up everything. He's gotten his best friend killed. Um, and then now, his Bathsheba is pregnant with a child, and he's like, okay, he's gotten Uriah killed, so now he can take Bathsheba as his wife. And then the child dies, right? As a punishment from God, basically. Which that's something again I still grapple with. I'm not like the most knowledgeable theologian. Like, that's something I still need to like understand, like why God. I guess
Mm.
we won't understand why God does what He does, but like in that case, that's a story for another day. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, the child dies, and I remember I was watching this one clip on YouTube. It was, I think it's made by not Angel Studios, but the people who made The Chosen. Um, there's like a clip where no, it's in The Chosen. Sorry, it isn't The Chosen, and they kind of just there's some scenes where they're going back to King David, and he was in this place where he was mourning. Um, it was what happened. I think there was, I'm forgetting now, but it had to do with the baby. The baby was sick. Yeah, the baby was sick, and David was praying. He was praying. He was praying. He was praying. He was praying.
Mm.
Um, and and then after the child died, David was still praying to God, right? Like, he was still praying, still praying. And Bathsheba was like, "Why do you still pray to God? Like, when He's just done this to you?" And I forgot what David's answer was, but again, it was just another show of like just how faithful David was. Even though he was like, in that case, I'd kind of be like, okay, yeah, God, I know I've done wrong and everything, but like, damn, to like kill my child, I feel like that's a bit extreme. But like, David was
Mm.
still he was faithful. Like, he was still faithful, still praying to God,
Yeah.
and still trying to like he was still repentant. And I think that was just an important show of David's faith. Um, and before I get onto like the salvation thing, I just want to get your take on that, Darren, and everything I said.
Yeah, I know yeah, David's a brilliant example. He again, man after God's heart, and you'd think like it's this perfect image of we think it's like an image of perfection, like when we think about David, when we think about Goliath and how he's a king and all these things, but it happens to the best of us. It happens to even those sitting in the highest positions. They are going to fall short. They are going to sin. Um, and I mean that started. I think it's a good point that I want to make here. Is like it started with Adam and Eve, right? Like literally
Mm.
started at the beginning of the Bible, and it just flowed all the way through. Um, Adam and Eve in the garden, they were tempted. Like God literally said, "Do not eat that tree. Like do not eat from that tree. That's the one thing I'm just asking you to do. Don't do that." Okay, and then what did they do? They did it. They got tempted. Eve got tempted by the snake first. She came with Adam. She's like, listen, this is what the snake's saying. Serpent saying this, should we do it? And they say, why not? What's the worst that could happen to us, right? And
Mm.
that's our free will into the world. And so it's very easy to also to judge Adam and Eve and say, oh, they're so dumb. Like, why would you eat from the tree? God told them not to eat from whatever. But, you're human at the end of the day. Like, God knew that was going to happen. He literally knew that Adam and Eve would eat from the tree. And it's insane because, like, we need to put ourselves in those people's shoes as well. Like, if we were David, we most likely would have done the same thing, probably
Yeah.
worse. Okay.
Mm.
And yeah, like it's just hard to understand it from a human point of view, but that is what we are at the end of the day. We humans love by God. We love by our creator no matter what. Like there's just unconditional love given to us. And God's always faithful. And having the same kind of faith for God is it's a hard thing to do, but
Yeah.
that's literally what makes us close to God. It's our faith. Literally just having that faith in God. And yeah, like adultery, we see with David. I mean, it's like the last thing you'd expect, but it's something that happened. And I mean, that's a test to like the power of lust and what it can do. Literally going for your best friend's wife. That's what it does. Like there's no logic with lust. It just things just happen. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a brilliant story.